Hello and welcome. I'm glad you could be with me. I think you're going to find the show tonight fascinating and educational. We're going to ask you tonight, via my guest, to consider thinking about a shift to a more plant-based diet. Terry Gips is with me, and he says he doesn't want to push people, but he wants to give them information that I find very persuasive, and I think you will too. Terry is an agricultural economist. He's an author. He's a local man, but has had an influence really internationally with his work on sustainability. And his work goes way back to 1983 when you started being real public with what you were doing, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think with that, I'll just jump right in.
Sure.
We want to maximize our time
Great.
here because we've got so much to cover.
Yeah.
There was a big UN report that came out this August. We're taping, by the way, in September of 2019. And it was important for a lot of reasons, but it talked about our reliance on meat and beef particularly. Can you just give us sort of the high points that you found most important, Terry, from that report?
Sure. You know, the report was the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so people could look that up. It's more than 1,000 pages, so there's a lot of reading.
Longer
with a lot,
than the Mueller report.
Yes, much longer than that. And but what's interesting is for the very first time, the UN really came out and looked at the effect of dietary choices. And what it showed, which had not been done before, and what it quantified, is the impact that our dietary choices could make on climate change. This was not something that Al Gore talked about when he did Inconvenient Truth. He focused on cars and on coal-fired power plants, those types of emissions, but really didn't talk about the agriculture sector and particularly about meat production. And what we know is that about 18% of all of the emissions in terms of climate change are from animal agriculture. That's more than all the cars, trucks, SUVs, planes, ships, and all forms of transportation combined. So it's a huge impact. And what the UN did is they quantified that amount of impact and what it could do in terms of addressing the climate crisis that we're facing.
Well, before we go any further, I'm sure some people who have not been tracking with this kind of thinking are saying, now wait a minute, how can animal and crop production impact like cars and planes and automobiles?
Yes. Well, it's not that they're impacting the cars or planes or automobiles, but those emissions from all of those is, if you total all of those forms of transportation, it is the impact from animal agriculture is more than all of those combined. We tend to think about our cars or other forms of transportation, but really the impact from animal agriculture is far greater than most people imagine.
But why, Terry?
Yeah.
What is the cause?
So the reason why it's so impactful is that the animals in animal agriculture produce a huge amount of methane, particularly the cattle, the livestock. Produce huge amounts of methane. And methane is 21 times more of a greenhouse gas pollutant than is carbon dioxide. We tend to focus on carbon dioxide, but it's 21 times greater. So the impact from this animal agriculture is huge. It's from the cows themselves, but it's also from their manure in the manure ponds. It's also related to the crops that are used and the nitrogen fertilizers, nitrous oxide. All of those things are contributors, major contributors to climate change.
So they're holding heat via all those emissions.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so that's really the huge contribution that animal agriculture is making, and why, if we were to do a reduction in the amount of meat, that the good news is that the methane only lasts for about 8 years. in the atmosphere, which is great. Carbon dioxide lasts for more than 100 years. So the good news is that if you reduce the amount of meat consumption, it can have a direct effect on climate change in literally only 8 years. So we could have an impact much sooner. We're not doomed. We actually can change, which is amazing. And the UN report makes it very clear that not only does this benefit things in terms of climate change and addressing climate change, but it helps stop desertification, so all the deserts that are being created and degradation of the land, but also it helps people, and this is something people don't talk much about, it helps poor people be able to have more healthy lives and also being able to have better incomes. So it's a win-win-win across the board.
But also, I'm guessing, impact migration that we're starting to deal with globally.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's one of the ways that we can actually use less land by having a plant-based diet, and that causes less degradation. It allows our forests to be able to regenerate. And it stops a lot of different forms of pollution, because we're not just concerned with the climate change impact. Animal agriculture produces about 66% of all of the ammonia release that's going on that causes acid rain. So it's impactful on many different levels, as well as water pollution from the runoff from the farms. And here in Minnesota, the Minnesota River is heavily polluted from livestock runoff. So you get many, many different benefits.
We're such a meat-oriented country, though, aren't we, in the United States? It's not that way all over the world, but
it's growing that way.
It's becoming more.
It is. I mean, it's
Even
expected.
India,
yeah.
Thailand, all those areas that
so many
haven't
countries, as incomes are increasing, they're increasing their meat consumption. It's expected to double by 2050 and globally, and those impacts are just huge in terms of contributing to climate change. So that's why the UN actually is addressing this. They're saying we could reduce the amount of land we need, we can reduce the greenhouse gas effects, and we can be healthier if we were to make this dietary change. And it's the first time they've ever come out and really just said it and given the results.
Which is a huge, big step, but it really goes back, as you were telling me earlier, 20 to 30 years, doesn't it, in terms of what a lot of scientists did know about agriculture.
Yeah, we've known about this, and it's been growing, and that's why you're starting to see a shift, and you're starting to see all kinds of products that are helping people be able to make a transition to a much healthier plant-based diet.
What do you think of some of the, I'm sure you've tried some of the meatless, but taste like meat products.
Yeah.
What do you think of some of them?
Well, I think that we have come so far that to the point now that there are all kinds of plant-based burgers that you can get. That actually, if in taste tests, you'll find that people will say it tastes as good as regular ground beef, as a burger. And so we've got cheese that can melt and be used in a pizza that people love. There are all kinds of, there's brats and hot dogs that are, all plant-based. So for people with heart conditions or other kinds of health challenges, it really can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I want to talk about the individual benefits as well as the planetary, of course. But just before we shift to that, dairy cattle, and we're talking beef primarily right at this minute, but we also need to really stop and think about what the dairy industry, and in Minnesota, that's a big part of our business. Tell us a little bit about the connection in terms of milk production and
Yeah, most of us think that we need to eat meat and we need to drink milk to be able to get the protein.
Right.
And the milk we need, of course, to be able to get calcium. That's what we've all been taught. And that if you don't drink milk, you won't have adequate calcium. But what people don't talk about is the fact that actually, if you have a high meat diet or even a moderate meat diet and you have a lot of dairy because you're trying to increase your calcium, what actually happens is that milk, that dairy that you have, is actually acidic. It acidifies in the body, and it needs to be balanced. And the way that the body balances it, it's got to find something to buffer it. And what buffers it is actually the calcium that's in your bones.
So that means we start losing?
We start losing.
Calcium.
The body has to take calcium out of the bones in order to help neutralize this acid from the milk. And that is excreted in the urine. And the net effect when you have a medium to high meat diet is that you actually lose overall body calcium, even though you're getting calcium. So it almost doesn't make sense because of the acidification that's taken place.
What if you ate a very low meat diet? Could you then drink more milk and eat more yogurt?
You could. You could still have moderate amounts of the milk. But what we have found, and there are all kinds of studies, the largest study ever done, the nurses study, which thousands and thousands of nurses that they studied, actually found that the more milk they drank, the more bone fractures they had. And there have been many other studies that are documenting this, which is almost completely contradictory to everything that we've all been told. So people are really surprised when they hear that. And you can get calcium from all kinds of plant sources, as well as some from supplements, so you don't have to have that problem. You don't have to get it from drinking milk. And there are all kinds of plant-based milk products like almond milk or soy milk or flax or other kinds of, or oat milk, that can be made that they can be fortified with calcium, so you can get the calcium, but without the downside.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So it's a different kind of calcium then? Or
no, it's
the same?
It's not the calcium that's the problem in its direct source. It's just that the milk itself is acidic in the body.
Oh, I
so
see.
It's not the calcium. The calcium is good.
Okay,
but it's that acidification that's taking place from both meat and from dairy products. Both contribute to the acidification.
I understand.
Yeah.
I hope you guys are tracking it, but yeah, that makes sense, Terry. Well, then there's the humane treatment of the dairy cows too, which is almost another show, isn't it?
Yes.
But that's
a whole other issue, where most people don't realize this, but most dairy cattle get to live to be about 4 years old. People imagine that they're out in a beautiful pasture and that they're perfectly taken care of, but most are not. Most are in, they're confined and have very little movement out onto a pasture. And the problem with that is that the cows will only be allowed to live till they're about 4 years old, because their milk production starts going down and the quality of their meat starts getting worse. So it's at about 4 years old that they're then slaughtered. So when you're drinking milk, there is the killing of that animal that's involved. People think, oh, they just keep producing, and they don't. And it's about 4 years old when they have to then be made into hamburger meat.
A lot of things we don't know, but are right here under our noses, isn't it, Drew?
And we have also issues with the feed that the cattle have. This is a huge issue that people don't really talk much about, but the feed that they're given, there's what is called atmospheric depositions of all kinds of pollutants, and it falls on the grasses. And the cows eat huge amounts of grasses. All of those depositions of all of those chemicals are held in the fat of the dairy cow. And so when you're drinking the milk, you're getting, from that fat, you're getting all of these contaminants, all of these pollutants that are out in our general environment, but they're all concentrated into that. So that's an issue. And then there are issues about antibiotics, and there are issues about some of the hormones, for bovine growth hormone and other hormones that are given to increase weight gain of animals and that kind of thing. So it's a multi-pronged problem, aside from the pollution from the manure lagoons.
So we're looking at both personal health, animal health, the planet's health.
Exactly.
All together here. Let's talk about some of the benefits medically, health-wise for individuals.
Sure.
Because people don't like to change, right? So there's got to be some real motivating things. And for some people, saving the planet's a big enough goal, right? Yeah. But for others, it's maybe going to be what's in it,
Yes.
for our family, and that's also huge. So what about heart disease? Let's start with the big one.
Yeah. Well, in heart disease, vegans, people eating just a plant-based diet, and vegetarians have a far, far lower incidence of heart disease. And basically, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, in a TV special he did for CNN, basically said, there's no need to be able to have a heart attack anymore, that we can get rid of them, and essentially through a plant-based diet. And there are all kinds of studies that document this, like the China study, which is the largest study ever done, showed those kinds of benefits. It's the vegan or plant-based person's chance of having heart disease is like 2% versus,
wow.
I don't know, it's like 30 or 40%
wow.
chance.
Wow.
So it's far, far less.
And cancer, I read 25% approximately less risk of getting cancer
Yes.
if you have a vegetarian diet.
Yes.
Not even vegan, just
That's
vegetarian.
Right. Yeah. And even less risk with a just total plant-based diet. So yeah, there is a definite correlation between certain types of cancer, particularly cancer of the colon, which is really a major
It's one of the
killer.
big ones, isn't
and,
it?
Yeah, and that really comes along with meat consumption. You can see that correlation. Which just reminded me that we know in studies from around the world, just back to the dairy issue with osteoporosis, that countries that have high meat consumption and high dairy consumption have huge rates of osteoporosis.
Really?
And those countries that don't have almost no osteoporosis, like in Japan, it almost doesn't exist. And as they've started to adopt an American diet, their rates of osteoporosis have gone up. So
wow.
there are these multiple health effects that we're seeing. Stroke, diabetes, all kinds of things are correlated, very clear strokes, correlated to what we're doing in terms of diet.
You and I are using the word vegan and vegetarian.
Yeah.
Could you we only have 10 minutes left at the
Sure.
most, but could you just kind of quickly give us the continuum in brief
Yeah.
for those who might not know?
Yeah, I would say on one end is what we call the Omnivore Diet, where you pretty much eat anything.
Right.
And at the other end would be a plant-based diet. And I always encourage, whichever end you're at, to eat organic. That's food that's grown without the synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, and with good farming practices that allow the land to be fully sustainable, to be regenerative. So at this one end is the vegan, and then that is completely a plant-based diet. And then there's vegetarian, and some vegetarians will eat dairy and eggs. So a dairy, person would be called a lacto-vegetarian, and an egg person would be an ovo-vegetarian. So sometimes we call it, if you do both, lacto-ovo-vegetarian. And then you could go from there to some people don't want to eat red meat. So they may eat chicken. And then other people, as you move down, are pescatarians, so that they will eat seafood, but no animal products.
Sure.
And then there are different degrees, of the others.
And as you are going around the country and the world talking about this, you're not saying to people, you've got to switch to be a vegan right away, right? I mean, you're giving people, as I said earlier, I guess, information.
Yeah.
are you tempted, though, Terry, to push a little harder and say...
I'm not really. I really don't want to push people because I think it has to be a choice that the person wants to make, whether it's for their health, whether it's for the future of the planet, whether saving money. You can save $1,200 a year on a plant-based diet.
Now that's another motivator.
It is, and you know, so there are just so many different benefits in terms of the quality of your life. Dr. Alan Green, a pediatrician at Stanford University, said that you will lose at least 10 years of life with the standard American diet, possibly even more. And
10 years.
Yes, at least. And at the same time, the medical costs in your lifetime will be $3 million more. $3 million. So
per individual.
Per individual.
Wow.
$3 million per person just from the diet that we have. And so I think people can live a much better quality of life. They can live longer. They can live healthier. But we can also save our health care system huge amounts of money. You know, we have diabetes, that's running rampant. We have obesity that is huge. And vegans and vegetarians have far, far lower rates of diabetes, of obesity, all of those significant health indicators.
So persuasive. We've got 5 minutes left now. I'm getting a signal. Give us some tips, because people need to have something to grab hold of here besides just information, to make some changes that start having an impact. Yeah. What are some simple things we can all do?
Well, one of the first things I feel is that you can substitute these great alternatives to meat products, plant-based products that are available everywhere. And so it's very easy to get burgers or hot dogs or brats or whatever, and just be able to substitute them. Substitute the cheese, like a Daiya cheese, substitute the non-dairy milks that are available. So I think that there are a lot of very simple products that are out there, and you can make almost any kind of ethnic food and do it very easily and simply. And I've put a paper together of how you can actually save money in doing that with all kinds of organic vegan meals for $1 to $2 a person for a meal. And it's just not hard. It's very easy to do. So obviously things like rice and beans, some of those core staples like that are really good for you and will help address all kinds of different diseases at the same time.
I know you spoke recently at the Minnesota State Fair, and I read some of your information, and you gave people even tips on how to eat at the fair without eating,
the
meat.
Standard American diet on steroids.
So, but a lot of the choices you brought to people's minds were ethnic related diets, weren't they? So.
Yeah, I think the ethnic diets, most diets from around the world are actually plant-based diets at their core, and they will use some meat as an addition, but they are not meat at the center of the diet. And that's true, whether it's in Latin America or in Africa, all over, you'll find that.
So that was interesting. They're saying we should give people some resource to go to. And what would you like to plug in terms of a website, or let's give your website for sure. But beyond that, do you have one or two favorites you can throw out, and we'll put them on the screen?
Sure. Well, the Alliance for Sustainability has a wide number of resources. I had these books that I did, the Humane Consumer and Producer Guide and Breaking the Pesticide Habit on alternatives to hazardous pesticides. I think that there are some great groups here, Compassionate Action for Animals, which has all kinds of potlucks and gatherings, and the Animal Rights Coalition are two of the really great groups. We have some wonderful vegan restaurants that are really so popular. Sometimes it's not even easy to get in, but they're restaurants like J. Selby's that has all kinds of non-meat products. It is completely vegan, and so people should try that and see what that's like. There's French Meadow Bakery and Cafe,
which I think people know about.
They know about,
it's been around.
So there are all kinds, and they're growing. There are more and more of these restaurants, Seed Cafe, others that are really doing a great job.
I came across a book and I thought it was great. Eat for the Planet. Do you know that book?
I don't.
Oh, okay. It's by Neil Zacharias and a man named Gene Stone. And I would recommend that book, and I hope you approve when you do see it.
No, it sounds great.
I also would like to tell you that to learn more about just the basics in terms of Terry's work, we did an interview back in 2013 that's on YouTube, and it's called Terry Gips on Sustainability. And if you're intrigued and excited about what he's saying, it's a wonderful kind of intro to what we're talking about tonight.
It is.
So I would suggest you check that out.
Yeah, because it's important for people to know that there are all kinds of simple steps that we can take that will actually save us money, give us a better quality of life, and help protect our planet.
Yeah, what better kind of win-win-win than that, right?
And it's something I think all of us can agree upon, that we want to have a future that we can pass on to the next generation. And we can do it, but we can also save money at the same time. So it's not a bad thing. It's really a tremendous opportunity.
Good thing. Well, thank you so much for
Thanks
coming
so
down.
much.
Great to have you here again and to learn from you. We'll hold your books up later for some post-production work so you can get a peek at them. So thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.